All that he can think, you can think. All that he can say, you can say. All that he can demand, you can demand. That's not what's going on here in that little word, as. Second observation. The aim of the godly husband's desire for change in his wife is conformity to Christ, not conformity to himself or to his own private selfish wishes. Look at the words in verses 26 and 27, the key words. That he may, this is verse 26, that he may sanctify her. Christ died to sanctify his bride. Now love her that way. So your longing is not to get her to do everything my personal preferences desire, but get her to be holy. Oh, my wife, holy. Or a second word, in splendor. That is verse 27. That he might present the church to himself in splendor. I want her to be morally beautiful. Third, verse 27 again, the word holy. She might be holy and blameless. These words imply that our desires as husbands for our wives should be measured by God's standard of holiness, not my personal preferences. That's second observation. Third observation. And this is the most important of the three. What Paul draws attention to most amazingly, and let it land on you, men especially. Wives will hear it and wish it were more true. Husbands should hear it and be staggered at the thought. Verse 25. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. That means he died. That he might sanctify her. The most radical thing that has ever been said about marriage in the world is this. Every culture in the world is blown to smithereens by this statement. African cultures, Asian cultures, American cultures are simply shattered by this statement. I've sat with pastors overseas and watch how their wives are treated. A nice multiculturalist who didn't happen to be a feminist at the time would say, oh, leave this culture alone. It's culture. All cultures are equal? Baloney. Baloney. You're not loving her like Christ loved the church. Otherwise, you'd pick up the hoe instead of sitting on your duff all day. The most radical thing that has ever been said to any husband is love your wife by dying. Now, just think now how this alters the way you approach getting her to do what you want her to do. Right? How do you approach it? The answer is you die. The way Jesus brought about sanctification was dying. Not lording it over the church, not with a whip, He died to make her holy. This is so radically transforming and preservative from that dangerous ground that I described. That man who has no sense of what appropriate differences are and no sense about the difference between holiness and his own personal desires, he's not thinking the way I lead is by dying. So guys, got to work that one through. You've got to think that through. Some guys are so fearful of being shamed by attempting leadership that it's pure pride cloaking as humility. It's pure pride cloaked in the guise of humility. Because she's for me, I'm not this and I'm not that. Baloney, you are afraid that ego will be compromised. You're not being a man. So the third observation that prevents us from going onto that dangerous ground is men in the pursuit of the conformity of their wives to Christ pursue it not by lording it over her, but by dying for her. When we lead her, or even if necessary, confront her, are we self-exalting or self-denying? Are we contemptuous or compassionate? You could add to the list. So, if a husband is loving and wise, like Christ, in all these ways that I've just described, his desire for his wife's change will feel, to a humble wife, I've stuck in a lot of qualifiers there, wise husband, loving husband, like these ways. The wife is humble and not rebellious. If all of that is true, then the desire that she change will be felt by her as being served, not humiliated. Christ clearly desires for his bride to grow in holiness. He died to bring it about. So, brothers, govern your desires for your wife's change by self-denying death and service and sacrifice. May God give us the humility and the courage to measure our methods of husbanding by the sufferings of Christ. It is amazing what power there is in loving like this. Let's turn to the women. The wife's desire for her husband's change. Now, this is not a message, again, about headship and submission yet. But in order to make the points I'm making, I have to make points about what headship and submission are not. I don't want to talk too much yet about what they are, but I do need to say another comment about what they're not. And I've just said that a husband is not Christ. His headship is not equal signs to Christ's headship. And so the implication here for the women is that a wife's submission to the husband is not identical with her submission to Christ. That's what it's not. It's like it. The text says it's like it. Verse 22, wives, submit to your own husbands as, now you got that word again, to the Lord. Now that word as does not mean that Christ and the husband are the same. Christ is supreme, the husband is not. Her allegiance is first to Christ and then to her husband, not the other way around. The analogy here only works if it goes that way. Only if wives have supreme allegiance to Jesus will their allegiance to their husbands not be treason against Jesus. You got that now? Let that be clear. We do not equate a woman's submission to her king and creator and redeemer with her submission to her husband. Christ is not down here, he's up here. And he gets supreme, uncompromised, unquestioning allegiance from wives. Right, wives? And then the attempt to submit here is not idolatry or treason.